Recently, Voice of Armenians TV New York had a sit-down interview with Don Boyajian, who is running for Congress for New York's 21st Congressional District. Thank you so much for coming and having this conversation with us. I want to begin our conversation by something that is always fascinating for us as Armenians. How did we come here? Usually the stories are quite inspiring because our people came here under incredibly difficult circumstances. Oftentimes, barely staying alive. They came here with nothing to this blessed land. And they settled down, and a few generations later, someone like you is running for Congress. How about that for an inspiring story? Tell us a little bit about your Armenian roots, your grandparents, your parents. When did they come? How did they settle? How did your parents meet?
Well, thank you for having me on the show today. It's an interesting thing. Both sides of my family are 100% Armenian. My mother's side came in through Providence during the Armenian Genocide, and her family really did not do well. Most of them did not make it to the United States. A lot of them died during the genocide, but part of her family made it over. My father's side was Eintopsi. They came over around a little bit before my mother's side, and they ended up coming into upstate New York, near the region where I live, and there's actually a large Armenian community in upstate New York, believe it or not. And my grandfather, he eventually bought a farm in Saratoga County, which is very close to where I grew up, and he had a sheep farm and a livestock auction. And there was a wonderful community of Armenians in the region. There were several Armenian churches when he was young and when my father was young. And still to this day, there's a vibrant Armenian community where I live. It's a big part of my youth. It was a big part of my upbringing. And it was a big part of my parents' upbringing as well. And that's how they met, was through the Armenian church and through the Armenian community. They actually met at an ACYOA sports weekend at a KEF. I think they were playing tennis or something like that. But we've enjoyed that part of our upstate community. A big part of that is also the Armenian community in upstate New York as well.
When I was doing research about you prior to this interview, it was clear to me that your career as a lawyer was on an upwards trajectory. And yet, you choose to enter a public service, which is, as we all know, is very rewarding, very consequential, but is also very challenging. What made you take that step?
I had a light bulb moment where I realized that I was in a position in my life where I could really affect change and help the community that had nurtured me for my whole life. I had a lot of frustrations about the trajectory. I had seen my region go down over the course of my life, seen a lot of young people leave, and I thought to myself, well, why can't I change these things that I don't like about my community? Why can't I be the person that changes the trajectory, makes it the right trajectory? So it is a very difficult path, but I find it very fulfilling. I empty the tank every day. I go to bed exhausted at night, but I feel great about it. And I think a life spent trying to help others and help your community is a life well spent. I really do firmly believe that.
Let's speak a little bit about the issues that you're running on. I looked at your website, and to break it down, you are interested in changing the economical fortunes of your region, healthcare, providing an affordable healthcare to people, environmental questions, environmental issues, taking care of the elderly. We are in wars. People forget that, tend to forget that. But there's been a lot of talk about how veterans are being treated. Certainly can be a better job done in that department. Break it down a little bit for me. Where do you stand on these issues?
Well, I think the first thing you got to say is, as a representative, in the U.S. House of Representatives, it's your job to represent the needs of your district. But I think there is a common tone across a lot of rural communities, like the 21st District in New York, where we've been underrepresented at the federal level. Congress is not spending their money in the right place, as far as I'm concerned. You see a lot of programs get cut, like community development block grants, for example, which are used to fund infrastructure projects, which our region has a big need for reinvestment in infrastructure. You see programs like that cut at the federal level, it really hurts counties and towns in my district. So I think Congress is falling short in looking after rural communities. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, or whether it's a Democrat-controlled Congress or Republican, both sides they spend money. I want to make sure that if we're spending it in the right way, that we're helping people in need. That's why I'm a Democrat. I believe the Democratic Party at its core values and what it's rooted in, is rooted in uplifting people in need. So if you're going to spend money, it should be directed towards uplifting people in need. I think in a lot of ways the Democratic Party shifted away from its core message, at least in its messaging, and they had a little bit of a wake-up call in 2016.
Or a
big
wake-up call.
Let's hope it's big.
Yes.
And it's part of my reason for getting involved is because I want the Democratic Party to be the party of uplifting people in need. I want it to return to its core message and its core goal, and I want to be part of that process. It's not going to happen overnight. You have to earn it back at this point, I believe.
As a lawyer, you specialized in environmental issues. Am I correct?
That's right.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure.
Where is the region is at? What needs to be changed? What needs to be preserved? What are the challenges?
I really boil it down to two overarching themes that really drive me to care so deeply about environmental issues. One is intergenerational equity. What type of future are we building for the next generation? What are we leaving for the next generation? And secondly, I think this is more pressing in our current political climate, what's happened to the voice of science in the legislative process? When the president is taking scientists out of the EPA, isn't that concerning? I mean, it's ridiculous.
That's right.
So I'm very concerned about that right now. When I worked in Congress, we were working on the climate change legislation, the Waxman-Markey climate change bill. That was 10 years ago. I feel like we've gone 20 years backwards since that bill. We need to have, science needs to be at the front of the table when we're involved in the legislative process when it comes to environmental stewardship. And I think that's why it would be good to have a member of Congress that's science literate, such as myself.
That's right. Of course, we as Armenians have a very tragic history. I wish we didn't, but we do. And perhaps nothing is more horrific that happened to us in millenniums of our existence than massacres and Armenian genocide during World War I in Ottoman Turkey. 100 years plus have gone by. That sense of demand for justice is embedded in our national psychic worldwide. Many civilized countries have accepted the fact that what has occurred legally is defined as genocide. But of course, there are two countries that are perhaps the most important that require recognition, and that is Turkey and United States. When you and I were having a conversation prior to this interview, you mentioned that you were to a large degree involved in a regional resolution a few years back when we had all branches of government under democratic control. And we were very close. I even remember we were doing reporting at a time, and it was this just general excitement that this might happen. I have spoken in interviews with Chuck Schumer and a few other representatives who all agreed that this issue has to be put to rest. Historically, there is absolutely no doubt that it was a calculated massacre of minority citizens of Ottoman Empire, Armenians. If you can tell me a little bit about your involvement back when the legislation was active, and where we at now, and if elected, what do you think, what can you do, and what do you think the Congress should do to push this incredibly important issue to all Armenians forward?
Well, let me just start by saying that anybody at this point in time that can't acknowledge that this was a genocide, it was the first modern genocide, and it was essentially Hitler's template for the Holocaust.
Right. After all, who remembers Armenians?
Who remembers the Ottomans' annihilation of the Armenians? Anybody that can't acknowledge that at this point in time is denying history. When I was working as a legislative aide, where I was working on mainly science issues, and I saw the resolution come up and I saw it fall short, I was disgusted in so many ways. And I couldn't believe we didn't have the political will to get that done. It just goes to show you how powerful and entrenched the Turkish lobby is. And we have Armenians, we have many good friends in Congress that fight for our issues, but nobody's going to fight for the issues like an Armenian, somebody who both sides of his family struggled through the genocide, who I lost many of my descendants during the genocide, who I grew up reading Black Dog of Fate by Peter Blakey and ended up going to Colgate University where he was a professor, so moved by those issues in those books and that history. So if we want to have resolution brought to this tragedy and this disgrace that we haven't been able to acknowledge this event historically, you need to get an Armenian elected.
That's right. But earlier when you and I were having conversation, you mentioned something about local elections, which are coming up. Many people don't vote on local elections. Actually, many people don't even know who their representatives are on local level. And you rightfully corrected me and said it's incredibly important to vote on a local level. Why?
Our democracy really flows from the bottom up. The people in elected office don't control the shots. We control the shots. We, the people. It's our job as voters, and I'm speaking right now as just not a person running for office, but just as an American. Our job is to put the people in government that we want in there, people that are going to fight for us, and that starts at the local level. And you know, I'm the town attorney as well. A lot of the things that affect us on a day-to-day life happen at the local level, the town, village level, at the county level. So I think it's incredibly important, and we're seeing more activism, but I think it's incredibly important that people stay engaged, not just at the federal level, not just at the state level, but at the local level. Get the people in government that you want, because you deserve it. You deserve people that are fighting for you.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm very pleased to meet you. I've learned a lot during this conversation. I wish you best of luck in your endeavors, and I very much hope to speak with you soon as a congressman.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.